No country on earth is quite as comfortable inside its own past as Britain. The thatched roofs and timber frames are real. The Cotswold stone glowing gold in the afternoon light is real. So is the broadband router plugged into a wall that was built before the printing press. Britain did not choose to preserve its medieval housing stock. That distinction matters more than it sounds. But there is old, and then there is old. We begin in Suffolk, in the soft, rolling farmland between Sudbury and Bury St Edmunds, where the most complete medieval village in England sits exactly as its builders left it. Lavenham, population just under 2,000. In the 1500s, this was one of the wealthiest towns in England. The wool trade had made it fabulously rich. In 1524, Lavenham paid more in taxes than the cities of York or Lincoln. With that wealth, the clothiers built magnificent timber-framed houses. Over 320 buildings of historic significance still stand here. The Guildhall on the Market Square, the great church of Saints Peter and Paul, with its tower visible for miles across the flatlands, and row upon row of timber-framed cottages, their plaster washed in the distinctive Suffolk pink. Then the Dutch weavers in Colchester undercut them. The wool trade collapsed, and Lavenham could not afford to rebuild. That sudden collapse is precisely why so many medieval and Tudor buildings remain unmodified. Subsequent generations simply did not have the money to tear them down and start again. The Crooked House on the High Street was built in 1395 as part of a medieval hall house. The timber warped as green wood dried over centuries. Nobody had the funds to straighten it, and someone is living in it right now, making breakfast in a kitchen that was a kitchen when Henry V was king. 6 miles down a single-track lane from Lavenham, you reach Kersey, a village so perfectly preserved that you could remove the cars and film a medieval drama without changing a thing. One street drops steeply into a water-splash ford at the bottom and rises again toward the Church of St Mary on the hill. Timber-framed houses from the 1400s line both sides. All are occupied. The village gave its name to Kersey cloth, a coarse woolen fabric exported across Europe in the Middle Ages. Where Lavenham had the wealthy clothiers, Kersey had the weavers themselves. The houses are smaller, less ornate, but just as old. The ford at the bottom of the hill is still there. Cars drive through it every day. Parish registers show the same surnames repeating across centuries. Different generations, same doorways, same lanes. Crossing west into Wiltshire, the landscape changes from soft Suffolk clay to Cotswold limestone. Castle Combe sits in a deep wooded valley near Chippenham. It was listed in the Domesday Book of 1086 with 33 households. By the 14th century, a fulling mill was processing wool here. The Cotswold stone used for every house in the village is a local oolitic limestone that weathers to honey gold over the centuries. No new houses have been built in the historic centre since roughly 1600. The Bybrook River still runs beside the main street. The market cross still stands. When a resident opens their front door in the morning, they see exactly the same view their predecessors saw in the 1500s. The weavers' cottages along the lane beside the river were built low and close together, their doorways just inches from the flowing water. The stone bridge at the bottom of the village has carried foot traffic since the medieval period. Every property is owned by the Castle Combe estate, which has maintained an unbroken policy against modern additions to the streetscape. There are no television aerials visible from the main street, no yellow lines, no street lighting. When night falls here, it falls completely, just as it did when the weavers packed up their looms and walked home by candlelight. Castle Combe has appeared in countless films and television programs precisely because it looks untouched. It looks untouched because it is. Now, before we continue our journey, something needs to be said about why these houses survived at all. For years, the accepted wisdom among historians was that only the houses of the wealthy lasted beyond a generation or two. peasant homes were assumed to be disposable. The Leverhulme Trust study changed that understanding permanently. Researchers used dendrochronology to date the Cruck-built houses of the English Midlands. They found that nearly all the Cruck buildings sampled were constructed during the 300-year period from the 1260s to the 1550s. So many have survived that they cannot possibly all be of manorial status or the homes of the wealthiest members of the community. Long Crendon in Buckinghamshire is one of these Cruck villages. The houses here were built by working people, farmers, labourers, the kind of people history usually forgets. And yet their homes are still standing, still lived in, and now selling for well in excess of 3 times the national average house price. The needle shop on the high street has been selling needles since the 1500s. The courthouse, built around 1400, is now a National Trust property. But the houses on either side of it are private homes with families inside them. The people who built them would not recognise the prices they command, but they would recognise the buildings without hesitation. Moving southwest into the Cotswolds, we reach the limestone belt that runs from Bath to Chipping Campden. Here, the geology itself determines survival. Cotswold stone is almost indestructible. It does not rot, it does not burn easily, and it becomes more beautiful with age. The wool villages survived because poverty froze them in time. The stone villages survived because the earth gave them materials that simply refused to decay. Byberry sits on the River Colne in Gloucestershire. Arlington Row is a terrace of weavers' cottages dating to the 1400s, converted from a monastic wool store. William Morris once called Byberry the most beautiful village in England. The cottages now appear on every United Kingdom passport issued since 2010. They are Grade 1 listed. They are also lived in. These cottages were not built for beauty. They were functional workshops where wool was hung to dry on the upper racks. The low doorways and thick walls were entirely practical. The Colne runs past the front gardens. Trout still hold in the shallows beneath the stone bridges. Between the cottages and the river lies Rack Isle, the water meadow where cloth was once laid out on wooden frames to dry after fulling. It is now a nature reserve owned by the National Trust. Moorhens nest in the reeds. The meadow has not been built on in 600 years. It remains open ground for the same reason it was open ground in the 1400s. The river floods it every winter. Residents report the particular challenge of living in a building that appears on millions of passports. Tourists photograph their washing lines. Coaches idle outside their bedroom windows, and yet they stay. Some families have been here for generations. The house matters more than the inconvenience. A short drive north brings you to Lower Slaughter. The name comes from the Old English word slough, meaning wet land. Nothing to do with violence. The village has been inhabited for over 1,000 years. The Domesday Book lists it as Scloster in 1086. Most houses are built of Cotswold limestone in the 16th and 17th centuries. The layout has barely altered in a millennium. The River Eye runs through the village between stone footbridges that have been crossed daily for centuries. The old mill is now a tea room. The houses along the Eye have front gardens that slope gently to the water, exactly as they did when the Domesday Commissioners rode through on horseback. Children who grew up here in the 1950s describe a village that their medieval predecessors would have recognised without difficulty. On the Dorset coast, Abbotsbury takes its name from the Benedictine Abbey founded here in the 1040s. The Great Barn, one of the largest thatched buildings in England, dates to the 1400s. Stone cottages line the single street. The Swannery has been operating since the 14th century, making it the oldest managed colony of mute swans in the world. The abbey itself is gone. It was dissolved by Henry VIII, but the village that served it remains. The stone houses where monks, servants, and farm labourers lived are now private homes with front gardens and post boxes. The Great Barn stretches over 80 metres. Its walls are 3 feet thick. The original oak roof timbers have been dated to the 1480s. It was built to store the tithes owed to the monastery. The grain, wool, and livestock kept the religious community fed and funded. When the abbey fell, the barn stayed because it was useful. Farmers stored their harvests in it for another 400 years. That is how practical buildings survive, not through sentiment or heritage campaigns, but because someone still needs the space inside them. The stone cottages along the main street share the same honey-coloured local limestone, each one thick-walled and low-roofed against the coastal winds that come off Chesil Beach. The swannery keeper is a role that has existed continuously for over 600 years. The person feeding the swans today is doing exactly what someone has done on that spot since the Plantagenets were on the throne. In Kent, the village of Chilham presents one of the finest medieval squares in England. Timber-framed houses from the 15th century surround a central area overlooked by the Church of St Mary and the gates of Chilham Castle. The Domesday Book records Chilham as a substantial settlement. Kent's Wealden houses are among the best preserved medieval domestic buildings in the country. They were built by a rising class of prosperous yeomen who built for permanence and whose descendants are still walking through those same doorways. The White Horse pub on the square has served ale since the 15th century. The beams above the bar are original. When you lift a glass in the White Horse, you are drinking where 15 generations have drunk before you. Stone survives because of geology. Timber survives because of craftsmanship. But a village only survives as a living place if people choose to stay. And in certain corners of Britain, they have chosen to stay for an almost incomprehensible length of time. East Hendred in Oxfordshire is a cruck village from the Midland study, but the human story here runs deeper than architecture. The Eyston family have lived at Hendred House since the 1450s. The house itself dates to the 14th century. The family remained Catholic through the Reformation. They hid priests in concealed chambers. They maintained a private chapel when doing so risked execution. They did it anyway. Generation after generation, the Eystons chose to stay in the same house despite religious persecution, civil war, and everything else the centuries threw at them. The estate has passed through the same family for over 570 years. The chapel at Hendred House is one of only a handful of private Catholic chapels in England where Mass has been celebrated without interruption since before the Reformation. The priest holes built into the walls are still visible. Some are barely large enough for a man to stand upright. During the worst years of the persecution, a captured priest meant execution for the family harbouring him. The Eystons knew this. They built the hiding places anyway. The house itself is not grand by the standards of the great country estates. It is a working manor, a family home that happens to have been lived in by the same family since the Wars of the Roses were still being fought. The village still has its medieval chapel. The Plough pub has been serving since the 1500s. When residents describe East Hendred, they describe layers: medieval beneath Tudor, beneath Georgian, beneath modern. Every renovation reveals something older underneath. Pull up a floorboard and you find a beam from the 1300s. Far to the southwest, on the Devon coast, the village of Clovelly drops almost vertically from clifftop to harbour. The entire village is privately owned. The Hamlin family have held it since 1738, but Clovelly is far older. The Domesday Book records it as Clove Hangra in 1086. The main street is so steep that it has never accommodated vehicles. Supplies are still delivered by sledge. Cobbled steps run from the hilltop down to the harbour wall. The cottages are whitewashed stone and date from the 16th century and earlier. Clovelly is the only village in England that charges an admission fee to walk its streets. The revenue maintains the buildings. This model of single-family ownership has arguably preserved the village better than any heritage designation could. There are no satellite dishes visible from the street, no estate agents' boards. Fishermen still work from the harbour. The sledges that haul goods up the cobbles follow the same design used for centuries. The donkeys have been replaced by Land Rovers at the top, but from there down, nothing has changed. In Herefordshire, the black and white timber-framed villages of the Welsh Marches tell a different story of survival. Pembridge is one of the finest. The new inn dates to 1311 and claims to be one of the oldest continuously operating pubs in the country. The detached bell tower of St Mary's Church dates to the 14th century. It stands apart from the main building, a timber-framed structure resting on stone foundations, one of only 7 surviving detached bell towers in Herefordshire. The oak frame inside is original. The bells have been rung from this tower for over 600 years, calling the same parish to worship across the same fields. The oak used in these buildings came from the dense forests of the Welsh borders, where plentiful supplies enabled carpenters to erect houses of remarkable quality. The black and white pattern is created by exposed dark timber against lime-washed infill panels. These houses were designed for a wetter, windier climate, and they have weathered it for 600 years without complaint. North to Yorkshire now, where Coxwold sits on a ridge in the Hambleton Hills with views across the Vale of York. Since 700 AD, this village has had a church at the top of the hill. The present church was built in 1420. Shandy Hall was originally constructed in 1430 as a parsonage for the village priest. It later became the home of Lawrence Sterne, who wrote Tristram Shandy here in the 1760s. The Domesday Book mentions Coxwold. It survived the harrying of the north when William the Conqueror devastated Yorkshire so thoroughly that entire counties were left empty. It survived the dissolution. It survived the railways arriving and then departing again. Bell House, the almshouses dating from 1662, still stands. The Old Hall, built around 1600, still stands. The Falkenberg Arms still serves on the main street. Coxwold does not make a fuss about survival. It simply continues. The villages we have visited so far survived because of wealth, geology, or sheer familial stubbornness. The next group survived despite everything. These are places where the landscape itself tried to shake them loose, and they held on anyway. Robin Hood's Bay on the North Yorkshire coast clings to a near vertical cliff, as though it is afraid of letting go. Houses are stacked on top of one another, connected by narrow passages called ginnels that twist between the red-roofed buildings. The settlement dates to at least the 16th century, though evidence of earlier habitation runs deeper. The bay is mentioned in the records of Whitby Abbey from the 1200s. In the 18th century, this was one of the most notorious smuggling centres on the English coast. A network of tunnels and hidden passages connected the houses so tightly that, according to local tradition, a bale of contraband silk could be passed from the bottom of the village to the top without ever touching open ground. The ginnels are so narrow in places that you can touch both walls with outstretched arms. Staircases cut into the rock connect one level to the next. Front doors open onto the rooftops of the houses below. The whole village is built on the principle that flat ground is a luxury this cliff cannot afford. Every inch of the slope has been claimed and built upon and lived in. The sea has been claiming Robin Hood's Bay for centuries. Entire streets have fallen into the water. The cliffs crumble a little more with each winter storm. But the core of the village remains, and families who live there now include descendants of the fishing families who first built these houses 400 years ago. The Bay Hotel at the bottom has served since the 17th century, perched so close to the water that spray hits its windows when the weather turns rough. Around the headland, Staithes is another Yorkshire fishing village wedged into a narrow ravine where Staithes Beck meets the North Sea. Captain James Cook worked here as a boy in the 1740s in a haberdasher's shop that was later swallowed by the waves. The cottages are built from local ironstone and red pantile, designed to resist salt spray and gales. Staithes was once the largest fishing port between the Tyne and the Humber. The community was so self-contained that it developed its own dialect, barely intelligible to visitors from even 20 miles away. The bonnets worn by local women were distinctive and unchanged for centuries, passed from mother to daughter like the houses themselves. The fishing cobbles still launch from the beach below the village. The cod and lobster pub has been rebuilt multiple times after storms, but has occupied the same site since the 17th century. It stands where the beck meets the sea, exactly where you would build a pub if you wanted fishermen to drink in it. Over the Pennines into Cumbria, the village of Cartmel is dominated by its priory, founded in 1189 by Augustinian canons. When Henry VIII dissolved the monasteries, the priory church should have been demolished along with everything else. Instead, the local community successfully argued that it was also their parish church. That single act of communal defiance over 500 years ago is the reason Cartmel exists today. Everything radiates from that church like spokes from a wheel. The village square retains its medieval layout. Houses from the 15th and 16th centuries are still occupied. The Cavendish Arms dates to the 15th century. The gatehouse on the village square is the only surviving priory building apart from the church itself, and it served as the village school for centuries. The racecourse on the marshes has operated since at least the 1600s. Cartmel is famous now for sticky toffee pudding from the village shop. But the village was here long before pudding. Back into the Welsh marches, Weobley in Herefordshire is one of the best preserved black and white villages in England. In the Domesday Book, it was the second largest settlement in Herefordshire, with 72 households recorded. The Red Lion is a 14th century inn. Weobley once returned 2 members of Parliament, a status it held from the 1300s until the Great Reform Act of 1832. A village this small sending 2 MPs to Westminster tells you everything about how medieval political representation worked and who it served. The Broad Street layout is unchanged from the medieval market plan. The Church of Saints Peter and Paul has monuments going back to the 13th century. Estate agents in the area note that timber-framed properties in Weobley rarely come to market. When they do, they sell to families who intend to stay. We are nearly at the end of this journey. But the last 2 villages ask something different of us. They ask not just what has survived, but what it means that it has. Bretforton in Worcestershire is a village of medieval houses clustered around the Church of St Leonard, which dates to the 1200s. But Bretforton is known for one building in particular, the Fleece Inn. It was not built as a pub. It is a medieval farmhouse that was in the same family for over 500 years before being left to the National Trust in 1977. The building dates to at least the 1500s. The pewter collection on the mantelpiece was sitting in that same room when Shakespeare was alive. The last member of the Bird family to live there was Lola Taplin. She left the building and everything in it to the National Trust on the condition that nothing be moved. The pewter stays on the mantel. The settle stays by the fire. The flagstones in the kitchen have been worn smooth by centuries of feet walking the same path from door to hearth. You can sit in the Fleece today and drink ale in a room that has been used for that exact purpose since the Tudors. The fire burns in the same grate. The beams are the same beams. The only difference is you. And finally, Finchingfield in Essex, often described as the most photographed village in England. The green, the duck pond, the Norman church tower, the hill rising above it all. This composition has not changed in centuries. Houses from the 14th and 15th centuries surround the green. The Guildhall dates to the 1500s. The village is recorded in the Domesday Book with a population of around 300. Finchingfield is the village that makes you realise the title of this film is not an exaggeration. The houses around the green have been continuously occupied for over 600 years. They were homes when the Black Death killed half of England. They were homes when the Civil War divided families down the middle. They were homes when the bombers flew over on their way to Germany in 1943. And they are homes now. with wheelie bins and broadband and arguments about where to park. A resident once observed in the parish newsletter that living in a medieval house means accepting that the house is more important than you are. It was here before you. It will be here after you. Your job is to maintain it and hand it on. That is not a burden. It is a privilege. And it is a form of continuity that modern Britain, with its appetite for demolition and redevelopment, and the shiny and the new, is in genuine danger of forgetting. These 18 villages are not heritage exhibits behind velvet ropes. They are addresses. They have postmen and recycling days, and neighbours who have not spoken since 1987. But they also have walls that were raised when the longbow was the most advanced weapon in Europe. And someone is still making tea inside them.